When you engage with media, I mean, whether you're playing a huge video game or even just scrolling through a political debate online,
hmm
do you ever stop and wonder if you're actually just, consuming a story?
Or if there's something else going on under the surface.
Exactly. Are you, maybe, without even realizing it, following a very specific set of hidden rules?
Rules that are designed to make you believe something or feel a certain way.
Or even to act in a way that someone somewhere has already decided for you?
And that right there is the central mystery we're getting into in this deep dive.
Yeah.
We have this instinct, I think, to separate a story, which feels all subjective and creative, from a
Yeah.
system which feels rigid and, well, mechanical. But what if that separation is just wrong?
What if the story you're experiencing is actually fundamentally created by the system's architecture?
That's the mission today. We're going to pull apart this really intricate structure that researchers are calling narrative mechanics.
And this is all about how the underlying rules, the mechanics of pretty much any system connect directly to the story or the narrative that it ends up producing.
And we are going way beyond just video games here. We're talking about how these hidden mechanisms define everything from, say, a quest in Zelda, all the way to how political narratives can just explode and reinforce themselves in society today.
Right. We've put together a really fascinating stack of research for this, and it forces you to look at the world, both the digital one and the physical one, as, I don't know, a series of these really complex, layered rule sets.
And the big insight, the thing you have to accept right at the start, is what a lot of researchers now agree on.
Yeah.
The game or the system and the story are totally inseparable.
They're a single unit.
The networked interaction, as they call it. You can't have one without the other. If you change the rules, you fundamentally change the story.
And if you want a certain outcome, a particular story, you have to engineer the rules to get you there. That connection, that's narrative mechanics. And honestly, understanding how it works feels pretty key to navigating the world we live in now.
Okay, so let's unpack that. This idea that games and stories are completely networked. When a designer sits down to build something, it's not like they're writing a book on one hand and coding software on the other.
Not at all. The real challenge, the ideal design, is about perfectly marrying the ludic elements with the narrative element.
Ludic meaning.
The rules of play, what you can do, resource management, how you win, how you lose, all the crunchy, systemy stuff. And the narrative elements are, well, the context, the characters, the plot, the whole emotional vibe of the thing.
And if those two clash, it's a disaster.
Oh, it's terrible. You get that feeling of dissonance. The story tells you you're a world-saving hero, but the mechanics have you, I don't know, picking 10 flowers for 3 hours. It's jarring, it's confusing, and it just doesn't work. So what we're learning is that a good story isn't just a path you follow. The sources actually call narratives complex narrative mechanics containers.
Right. Think of a story less like a script and more like a really sophisticated machine with all these interlocking parts that guide how you interact with it.
And a huge part of that machine is how it handles player choice. The research breaks this down into 3 types of mechanics, and they get more and more subtle.
This is how designers really pull you in, moving beyond just press A for good, press B for bad.
Okay, so the first one is the most straightforward. Optional mechanics.
Yep. These are the little extras. They don't really move the main plot forward or change the game state, but they make the world feel deeper, richer.
So like reading the flavor text on an item in an RPG.
Exactly. Or diving into a character's huge biography in a game like Tekken. Or just, wandering around Liberty City and ignoring the mission marker completely.
It rewards your curiosity.
It does. But it's
Hmm.
totally not essential for just, beating the game.
Okay, so then we get a little more subtle with implicit decision mechanics. This is where it gets interesting because it's where the player thinks they're choosing freely.
This is when the game doesn't give you a clear menu of choices, like A, B, or C. Instead, you just have to proceed based on an assumption you've made.
How does that work in practice?
So imagine you're in a room, and the game's text only describes 3 items in detail: a book, a sword, and a candle. By picking up the sword, you have implicitly decided that the book and the candle aren't important.
And the game just runs with that.
The game now respects that assumption. It might close off a path that required the book, all because of that initial implicit choice you made without even realizing it was a choice.
And that leads to the deepest level, the one that really gives the player a sense of agency, the associative mechanic.
This is my favorite one. This is where the game rewards you not for following the rules, but for using your own imagination to literally fill in the gaps the designer left for you.
So the designer leaves a hole in the story on purpose.
So,
A structural narrative whole, exactly. And you, the player, use your own creativity to build the bridge across it. The sources use this amazing example, the game Far, loan sales.
I've heard of this one.
So you start in this abandoned house, you find some blueprints, some old portraits, then you go outside and see this huge, strange vehicle in the distance that, hey, looks just like the one in the plans. And your journey begins.
But the game never gives you a big cutscene explaining what it all means.
Never. It gives you no backstory for the vehicle, no context for the house. It just trusts that you'll make the connection, that you'll associate the plans with the vehicle.
And by leaving that narrative void, the experience becomes way more personal, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Was your character escaping something? Are they searching for their family, fulfilling a promise to whoever drew those plans? You fill in that blank with your own story. You are literally co-authoring the narrative through your interaction with the mechanics.
That's how they make that magic circle of immersion feel so solid. It's built by you.
So once you have those tiny micro mechanics of choice sorted, designers can scale up. And that's where we get the big structures of progression. Tasks, missions, and quests.
And there's a great hierarchy for this laid out by Tobias Heusner. It gives the story its structure, its pacing.
It starts at the very bottom with the task. This is the smallest possible unit. One goal, one activity.
Super quick, like 15 seconds long.
Yeah. Find the key, flip that switch, shoot that one guy standing right in front of you. It's an immediate, satisfying little feedback loop.
Then you bundle those together and you get a mission.
Right. A collection of tasks, usually more action-packed, maybe takes up to 15 minutes. And critically, missions don't always have to push the main story forward.
They're side content.
Often, yeah.
Right.
They might have a main objective you have to do, and then some optional secondary tasks. They give you flavor, experience points, but they aren't the main plot drivers.
And at the very top of the pyramid, you have the quest.
The quest. This is the big one. It's a whole collection of tasks and missions, all wrapped up in a clear narrative framework. It's often the equivalent of an entire level or a major chapter in the story.
A quest takes a chunk of the narrative, like the hero needs a magic sword, and turns it into a step-by-step playable itinerary.
The example from the sources is just perfect, recapturing the giant elephant automaton Varuda in Breath of the Wild.
Right. That one objective is huge. First, you have to find a guide.
That's a task.
Then you have to fight all these ice enemies on the way.
That's a mission.
Then you have to solve all those water puzzles to slow the thing down, and then finally you fight the boss inside it.
And that entire sequence, from the moment you get the objective to the final boss fight, that is one quest. It's this big, complex thing with a clear narrative goal, and it marks a huge turning point in the main story.
It's how you translate the classic structure of a legend or a book into something you can actually play.
Exactly, into practical, simulated, repeatable actions.
So that structure gets infinitely more complicated when you're dealing with an open-world mechanics container. That seems like the ultimate design challenge.
It really is, because you have to somehow maintain the integrity of your main story while also allowing for basically infinite player-generated stories to happen all around it.
The GTA Chinatown Wars example illustrates this perfectly. You've got the main linear story. This gangster arrives in Liberty City, has to deliver a sword to his uncle. It's 58 main missions.
That's the spine of it. That's the story the designers wrote for you.
But the open world system means a player can just opt out.
Completely.
Yeah.
You can spend dozens of hours just roaming around, stealing cars, running little side jobs like drug deliveries, buying scratch tickets.
Or just go for collector's achievements, right? Like finding all 21 safe houses to get the jeweled key to the city.
The system allows for all of it. It
Yeah.
accommodates all these different ways of engaging with the narrative, and it confirms your agency at every turn.
Mm.
You want to follow the plot? Great.
Mm.
You want to be a taxi driver for 10 hours? Also great.
But here's where it gets a bit wild. This concept is literally escaping the screen and bleeding into the real world.
Yes. These ideas from open world design are now actively being used in real-world urban planning. They're creating what the research calls urban playgrounds.
That is such a fascinating and maybe slightly alarming idea. That city districts are being designed like game levels with a dominant narrative theme.
They cite examples like Zurich's Europalley or London's Embankment. These aren't just random collections of buildings and parks. They're deliberately designed environments.
So the shops, the restaurants, the public spaces, they're all united under one big story, a cohesive theme.
An aesthetic or a social story that holds the whole district together. The goal is to basically gamify the experience of being in a city. Make it themed, easy to navigate, rule-based.
So when you walk into one of these areas, you're not just in a place, you're entering a mechanical container that's guiding your experience, what you buy, even the path you walk.
Like a massive multiplayer sandbox game. It's just proof that once you figure out the rules for an optimized, engaging experience in the digital world, it's inevitable that those rules will start showing up in the physical one. So if we move from structure and movement to how we perceive things, it turns out that the visual lens, how we actually see a game, isn't just window dressing. It's an active mechanic that shapes the whole narrative.
And this was true even for the most basic, old-school games. I mean, think about the Atari 2600. When you were playing Asteroids, you were literally just staring at a few crude pixels.
They barely resembled what they were supposed to be. A blocky triangle was your ship, a few dots were the asteroids.
But you weren't just seeing those pixels in a vacuum, were you?
Not at all. You were seeing them through this filter of all the external stuff, the advertising, the posters, and especially the incredibly detailed, beautiful illustrations on the game cartridges themselves. Think about the art for Pac-Man or Lara Croft.
Oh yeah, the art always promised this epic adventure that the game itself technologically couldn't quite deliver.
Exactly. But the sources argue this wasn't a failure. It was a brilliant narrative mechanic. That external art, that framing, it fired up your imagination.
It gave you the context you needed.
hmm And crucially, players who bought into that visual narrative, who used that art to interpret the simple graphics, were apparently rewarded with faster progress because they can read the connections better.
So the artwork provided the narrative rules for how to understand the game's mechanics. That's fascinating.
And this reliance on visual mechanics can get really, really witty in games that run purely on visual logic. Games where the rules are visual, but the results are absurd.
You're talking about something like Vector Park's Feed the Head.
The classic example. The whole premise is there's this giant head, and you have to interact with it. So you might start by, I don't know, tearing off its nose. That seems logical enough.
Right.
But then, and here's the mechanical twist. The eye unexpectedly falls out of the mouth.
Which makes no sense.
None at all. So you try to put the eye back where it belongs, following a kind of assumed anatomical rule, but of course that doesn't work.
So how do you move forward?
The only way to beat the level is to eat the eye. The visual logic starts with something you recognize, but the narrative logic forces a completely absurd outcome.
The mechanic isn't points or anything, it's just the sequence of visual manipulations.
Exactly. And that sequence pushes the story toward these really witty, often shocking results. It just proves that you don't need complex systems for mechanical progression. You just need a consistent, rewarding logic, no matter how strange it is.
Speaking of narrative framing, this makes me think about how games are talked about, specifically in reviews and journalism. Robert Glassschütner's research looks at how journalists use very different narrative strategies to frame a game.
Yeah, this is a really interesting shift. For a long time, game reviews were very technical, very holistic. They treated the game like a piece of software you dissect. You know, graphics, bugs, features, that sort of thing.
But that changed.
It changed dramatically around 2004 with something called the New Games Journalism Manifesto by Kieran Gillen. He argued for a total shift toward a much more personal, selective style of writing.
The idea being that games aren't just products, they're cultural artifacts.
Precisely. So the review needed to reflect that. It should be about storytelling, opinion, and the very personal experience of the reviewer playing the game. It wasn't just, what is this game?
Yeah.
It was, what did this game feel like to me?
And that's basically the standard now, isn't it?
It absolutely is. Almost every major outlet uses that personal first-person narrative approach. It's what consumers want, a personalized, emotionally resonant critique. The story of the reviewer playing the game is now just as important as the story of the game itself.
But this brings up a really weird mechanical distortion when we try to put a number on that subjective feeling. I'm talking about review score inflation.
Oh yeah, the 10-point scale problem.
Right. A truly average, mediocre game should logically be a 5 out of 10, 50%. It's right in the middle.
But as the sources confirm, a 50% score is basically a death sentence for a game in the social sphere.
It's seen as a failure.
It is. So a reviewer trying to be balanced will often give that perfectly mediocre game a 6 out of 10, or even a 70%. The mathematical middle is perceived as being way worse than it actually is.
And this gets even more pronounced on those 100-point systems like Metacritic uses. You almost never see major games hovering around the 50-point mark.
And if a game does land there, the professional community immediately writes it off as bad, even though statistically it should just mean average. You know, no major flaws, but no huge triumphs either.
So the very mechanic of applying a hard number to a subjective experience inherently distorts how we perceive it.
It forces a systemic upward bias just to avoid the stigma of being labeled half bad. It's a fascinating flaw in the system.
Okay, so we've seen how the rules of a system define the story, whether it's in-game graphics or review scores. Now we have to take that principle and apply it to the biggest, most complex game there is, politics and society.
This is where the sources draw a really direct and honestly powerful connection. Political actors are, in essence, trying to build and promote a dominant set of narrative mechanics.
And they strengthen these mechanics just like a game designer would, right?
Yeah.
With rewards and punishments.
Exactly. The rewards are things like validation, a sense of belonging, simple answers to complex problems. The punishments are social exclusion, being labeled as an opponent, an enemy. And the ultimate goal is to slowly but surely displace all other competing narrative realize until yours makes an absolute claim on the truth.
So for a political narrative to succeed, it has to be mechanically superior. It has to make its own rule set far more attractive and rewarding than reality.
Because reality is messy, it's complicated, it's slow. A good political narrative has to be fast, clear, and satisfying.
And to get that speed and satisfaction, it has to rely on exaggeration and, well, the improbable. It has to bypass critical thinking.
The parallel the research draws is pretty stark. It's like how an ego shooter game intentionally narcotizes your moral concepts. You can mow down dozens of enemies and feel great about it because the rules of the game reward you for that action.
And political narratives do the same thing with pointed exaggeration. They bypass careful analysis to give you the immediate reward of feeling right, of belonging to the right team.
Which brings us right to the core mechanism driving so much of our online world today. Assertion-driven mechanics.
You see this everywhere. Clickbait journalism, social media posts. The whole system runs on these radically phrased headlines that are just engineered for maximum engagement.
And the key to the mechanic is that these assertions attract both passionate supporters and passionate opponents at the same time.
Both sides rush into the comments, they share it, they argue about it.
And they generate this huge monetizable wave of online attention, completely, regardless of whether the original assertion had any basis in fact at all. The assertion itself is just mechanical input. The output is engagement.
And what's so wild is that even if the assertion gets debunked, the mechanic keeps working.
The sources bring up this fantastic analogy from the Swiss dramatist Friedrich Dürrenmatt. He said that even if an accusation is formally rejected, the suspicion remains.
And that remaining suspicion is the reward mechanism for the people who believe the assertion.
Yes. The system actually rewards them for finding new little bits of evidence, no matter how flimsy, to prop up that initial suspicion. It strengthens the magic circle of believers.
On social media, the like and share buttons literally build these little insulated magic circles for us. And inside that circle, the assertion just gets stronger and more emotionally rewarding, even if it's been totally disproven in the outside world.
And the ultimate version of this, the final boss, is the conspiracy container.
These aren't just random bad ideas. They are highly sophisticated, self-sustaining, narrative mechanical containers. And they're so robust because their core mechanic is designed to neutralize any attack from the outside.
If you try to use standard verifiable facts to dismantle something like a flat earth theory, the system just absorbs your facts and adapts.
It reframes the contradiction as more proof.
Exactly. The fact that the government has incredibly detailed satellite images of a round Earth isn't evidence against the theory. It becomes proof of just how massive the conspiracy to hide the truth must be.
So whether we're talking about flat Earth or QAnon or anything else, these containers all work the same way. They have a simple core mechanic. If a piece of evidence contradicts the conspiracy, it must be part of the conspiracy.
It's narrative mechanics at its most perfectly self-contained and fact-resistant.
This line of thinking naturally leads to an analysis of the biggest system of all, the market.
Right. The sources identify the neoliberal market not just as an economic system, but as a totalizing system of rules. It's a powerful mechanism built on profit maximization, and it's presented as the container that can solve any problem.
And its core mechanic is that it creates the same individual success story, the hero's journey of the entrepreneur, and applies it to any life story, no matter the context.
And it constantly validates itself through its reward mechanics.
Yeah.
You could always find an anecdote, a success story, even if it's a total statistical anomaly, that supports the market's main assertion and confirms to the reader that the system works.
You don't need robust data. Just an occasional aspirational story is reward enough.
And the profound implication here is that this narrative is so pervasive that it actively works against traditional humanitarian goals like truth or justice or human rights
Mm.
if those things are evaluated on a market basis.
If truth doesn't sell, the market's mechanics devalue it. If justice isn't profitable, it's mechanically discouraged.
And this is why the sources conclude that this whole mechanical way of structuring reality has forced us to change how we see ourselves. We're not just homo narrans anymore, the storytelling human.
We've evolved into something else.
We've become specimens of Homo cyberneticus. We're no longer linear storytellers. We are guided by these complex cybernetic narrative game mechanics and algorithms that are constantly feeding back, self-generating, and crucially, very prone to manipulation and distortion.
So on the surface, our culture might look like this fluid network where anything goes. But deep down, the engine is technical. It's algorithmic.
We are all players inside these constantly adaptive systems. And the only way to have any real autonomy is to understand the rules of the game you're in.
Okay, so if narratives are these powerful adaptive rule sets, that raises a huge question. If we play by these rules, if we internalize them, does that actually change our real-world beliefs and behaviors?
Can a game intentionally change your mind about something important?
Exactly, and this is where the research from Mary Flanagan and her lab, Tilt Factor, is so critical. They focus on what's called embedded design.
Their whole mission is to create pro-social games that have a real, measurable, positive impact on the world outside the game. And they do it by using these very subtle narrative mechanics to create transformative shifts in players.
The basic idea is that a well-designed game can get around the intellectual walls we put up. We resist being told what to think.
Right. But by carefully engineering mechanics that activate our imagination, that position us in a certain mindset, and that create genuine aha moments, they can lead to these subtle but profound changes in our attitudes.
Let's talk about the first technique they use, obfuscation.
This is all about deliberately changing the frame of the story to decrease what psychologists call psychological reactance.
That's our natural defensive pushback when we feel like we're being lectured or judged about a difficult topic.
And the classic example they created is a game called Ship Happens. It's a single-player interactive comic, and its goal was to increase the effectiveness of bystander intervention, specifically in situations like sexual assault.
Which is a topic that could immediately trigger that psychological reactance, especially if it's set on a college campus.
Exactly. So they didn't set it on a college campus. They made the narrative completely ridiculous. It's about future college students on a spring break trip to alien planets.
So you're encountering bizarre scenarios like dealing with giant alien slugs.
Right. The outlandish setting totally obfuscated the serious message. And in these weird, low-stakes situations, the player has to make choices about whether to intervene or not. And doing so mechanically strengthens their sense of agency and effectiveness.
And the results, the follow-up research, is what's key here.
It's incredible. Longitudinal studies showed that first-year male college students who played the game reported being significantly more likely to intervene in real-life situations afterward.
So the non-obvious embedded message worked because it disarmed their defenses first.
The ridiculous narrative let the mechanics of choice do their work.
Okay, what's the second technique?
Psychological distancing. This is about using distance, whether it's time, space, fictional setting, to get the player to engage with a problem more abstractly, with their strategic mind. It helps you see the big picture.
It makes a difficult personal topic feel less immediate, less threatening.
Precisely. And the example here is a fantasy game called The Enchanter. This one was designed to address the subtle but insidious bias against women in science.
How did it work?
In the game, you help the main character, Gertie, who's an aspiring scientist. And you help her overcome challenges that are presented as these external hostile voices, the sources of her self-doubt and imposter syndrome.
So by putting it all in a fantasy world, it creates that crucial psychological distance.
It allowed female science students to practice fighting back against negative self-talk, but not as an internal critique of themselves. It was an external problem in the game world, a mechanical obstacle to be overcome.
And the results on this one were just as provocative, weren't they?
They were. Playing just one session of the game decreased self-doubt immediately, and that positive effect lasted for at least a week. The fantasy mechanics literally helped them to externalize their negative thoughts, treat them like a disposable enemy, and get back to focusing on their real-world work.
So the magic circle isn't just an escape, it's a psychological training ground.
It is a place where engineered mechanics can actually leak out of the game world and change real behavior and real beliefs. The structure of the game literally becomes the structure of your internalized belief system. All right, let's pivot a bit and look at how culture and mechanics intersect. And we have to start with Japanese game design, specifically with a core concept called Mukokuseki.
Mukokuseki. That translates to something like borderless or nationless, right? I feel like I've heard it used to explain why characters like Mario or Pokemon seem sort of ethnically neutral.
That's the surface level understanding, yeah. That they erase visible ethnic traits to be more globally appealing.
But the sources say it's deeper than that.
Much deeper. Mokokoseki is actually a specific cultural strategy. It's about mixing foreign cultural traits, like, say, the visual style of American comics, which were already a global success, with known domestic Japanese elements.
So you chop up different cultural features.
And then you reculturalize them by mixing in familiar domestic stuff. You create a new, cohesive mechanical system that feels both global and paradoxically uniquely Japanese.
So the Japaneseness of a game isn't in the art style necessarily. Mario doesn't look stereotypically Japanese, it's in the underlying mechanics.
Exactly. And there's no better example than the collecting mechanic in Pokemon.
The whole idea of collecting, cataloging, counting these hundreds of little creatures.
That core mechanical loop is deeply tied to specific Japanese cultural phenomena, things like otaku culture, obviously, but also the very real, nostalgic childhood practice of catching and training insects.
And the research links this to a pretty powerful historical anchor, doesn't it?
It does. This practice of insect collecting and fighting is connected to what boys did during World War II. They'd catch crickets and train them to fight in matchboxes.
Because they were too young to fight in the actual war.
Right. It was this tiny, controllable surrogate for conflict, a way to mechanically engage with a world where they had no control. Pokemon and its mechanical DNA echoes that deep cultural memory.
And the original games added another layer to that, a social one. You couldn't just collect them all on your own.
No, that was the genius of it. To complete your Pokedex, you had to use the Game Boy Link cable.
Yeah.
You had to trade with other players. It introduced this compulsory social mechanic that balanced the solitary obsession of cataloging with the need to connect with a community.
This cultural blending also helps explain another very distinctive feature of Japanese games, the absurd cutscene.
Oh man, yes. Japanese games can be very heavy on narration, but sometimes they lean so far into the theatrics that, as a Western player, you're just left completely bewildered.
It's Mukokuseki again, but as a dramatic tool, fusing incredible complexity with incredible simplicity.
Think about the Metal Gear Solid series. I mean, MGS4 holds the Guinness World Record for the longest cutscene in a game, 27 minutes for one, and 71 minutes total.
And games like that, or Bayonetta, they're described as fusing the indulgent theatrics of anime with just complete outrageousness.
The plot points are often nonsensical, and Western players who are used to more streamlined, goal-focused stories can really struggle. The sources quote one analyst just calling it pointless weird shit.
You feel disoriented, like you're missing something.
Because you're seeing this mechanical fusion of total opposites. A simple gameplay loop wrapped in a hyper-complex, melodramatic story that mashes up romance with geopolitical espionage, or absurdity with deep tragedy. That fusion is the narrative structure.
Okay, shifting gears one last time in this section, we can also see mechanics being used for direct political intervention through art games and defictionalization.
This is Margaret Yarman's work, which is all about how art can use game mechanics to question the dominant political narratives of a moment, like during the COVID-19 pandemic.
She staged an intervention called the Social Distancer.
Right, it was a public performance. An artist would carry this large physical bounding box, a big metal frame around, in public spaces. And the whole point was to subversively reframe the pandemic mechanics we were all living under.
The performance was staging two specific types of play defined by Roger Kaiwa: elinx and mimicry.
Mimicry is just imitation role-playing. So the artists were acting out the very rigid rules of social distancing. And elinx is about the pursuit of vertigo, dizziness, a physical disruption of how you see the world.
By staging these absurdly rigid actions in public, they created this visual, physical story that forced people to question the political rules that have been imposed on their private lives.
It mechanically forced everyone who saw it, passersby, even the police, to ask themselves, is this art or is this for real? It turned the passive rules of distancing into an active questioning game.
And the performance actually revealed a kind of ethical problem embedded in those pandemic mechanics, didn't it?
It really did. The sources describe a moment when one of the performers ran into a colleague on the street. The colleague immediately pulled out hand sanitizer and disinfected himself, but he didn't offer any to the performer.
Wow.
That tiny, real-world mechanical interaction showed how the new rules were enforcing a focus on self-protection over collective well-being. It turned a public health measure into a mechanical reinforcement of private self-interest.
So to wrap this all up, let's look at how even the most basic mechanics, just action and movement, are engineered to create really profound emotional responses, things that go way beyond dialogue or plot.
We can go all the way back to the beginning for this one. Movement and character. Even the most rudimentary mechanics created powerful narratives. Think about Donkey Kong back in 1981.
The designer, Shigeru Miyamoto, took a story everyone knew, the Save the Princess fairy tale.
But he totally transformed the setting. The hero wasn't some noble knight. He was this insignificant little plumber named Mario, and he was up against this giant ape, King Kong.
And the story was completely secondary to the gameplay.
Entirely. The whole emotional journey came from the mechanics of climbing scaffolds, timing your jumps, dodging barrels, the frustration, the difficulty, and then the final reward of reaching the top. That whole arc was generated purely by the mechanical process of movement.
And that focus on mechanics-driven storytelling reaches its peak, I think, in modern games designed specifically for empathy, like The Last Guardian.
That game is a masterclass in what's called design by subtraction. It's a very reduced design. It actually takes away traditional player agency in order to force you into a specific emotional state.
The whole story is about the slow, empathetic bond that builds between the boy, who you control, and this huge AI-controlled creature, Trico.
And the emotional core is built on one thing, the mutual dependency mechanic.
You control the boy, who is effectively the sidekick.
Right. But you are completely, totally reliant on Trico, who is the real main character, just to get anywhere. You need Trico to jump up to high ledges, to cross giant gaps, to catch you when you make a desperate leap. You are mechanically subservient to this creature's AI.
Which forces you to be patient. You have to slow down, watch Trico's behavior, listen to its calls.
And that forced patience leads to this incredibly deep, inherent empathetic bond. You start to instinctively trust that Trico will save you, because the game system has rewarded that trust over and over again.
And what's amazing is that Trico has a whole character arc told through mechanics like overcoming its fear of those stained glass eyes, while the boy stays pretty much the same.
It reinforces that the AI beast is the emotional heart of the story. You, the player, are just the means through which Trico gets to experience the world.
And finally, we have to talk about the incredibly subtle emotional mechanics in the mobile game Florence. It's the ultimate example of the feel, not tell, show, or play philosophy.
It uses game mechanics not to challenge you, but to perfectly simulate emotional states. It's brilliant.
For example, in the beginning, it shows Florence's boring, uninspired daily life.
And this is supported mechanically. The color palette is dull and anxious. The gameplay is these repetitive loops, like just wiggling a toothbrush back and forth. The first time color literally bursts onto the screen is when Florence remembers her old passion for drawing. The mechanic is directly linked to an emotional breakthrough.
But the conversation mechanic is just a masterclass. When Florence first meets her love interest, Krish, her speech bubble is a jigsaw puzzle.
A difficult one with like 8 interlocking pieces. It perfectly symbolizes that feeling of shyness, of awkwardness, of struggling to find the right words.
But as they get closer, the puzzles get simpler.
They do. As the relationship blossoms, the pieces reduce until a conversation is just one simple shape. It represents that smooth, effortless flow of communication, the ease of a kiss. The mechanical difficulty literally decreases as the emotional bond increases.
And then when they fight, the mechanic flips again.
Oh, it's brutal. The puzzle pieces become sharp, angular, and they come at you really fast. You're desperately trying to help Florence complete her side of the argument, but Krish's speech bubbles are coming too quickly. He isn't listening.
So your mechanical inability to keep up makes you feel the conflict, the frustration, the disconnection. It's visceral.
But the most powerful mechanic in the entire game is the idle mechanic in the final act, which is called Let Go.
Florence and Krish are walking, and he starts to lag behind to fade out of the screen.
And if you tap on Krish, Florence will stop and wait for him to catch up. The chapter will not end until you, the player, stop interacting. You have to remain inactive and just let him fall behind and disappear.
The designer forces you to mechanically perform the act of letting go.
The feeling of loss isn't in the music or the dialogue. It's in the physical act of withholding your own agency. You have to accept and embody that feeling of emptiness to move on. It's the mechanics that deliver the final unforgettable emotional punch. Hashtag tag outro. So when you pull it all together, what we've done today is really pull back the curtain. We've shown that narrative mechanics are these fundamental rules that structure our reality.
They don't just explain how you beat a level in Zelda, they explain how a complex political ideology can take root, or how a simple game can be engineered to change our real-world beliefs about something as serious as bystander intervention.
We really have moved beyond being simple storytellers. We are fully integrated now as Homo cyberneticus.
We're constantly interacting inside these adaptive, feedback-driven systems, whether it's an algorithm, the market, or the giant multiplayer game of Twitter that's constantly challenging and reshaping our own personal stories.
And we have to understand that these rules are always shaping and sometimes distorting how we see the world. The only way to really navigate it all is to understand the architecture.
It's a dizzying thought, really, that all these systems of rules, digital, political, economic, are just generating stories all around us every single second. They're copying, transforming, and combining things just for optimized engagement.
They're what the sources call mechanisms of inspiration, and they're actively adapting just to survive.
Which brings us to our final provocative question for you to think about. Given that the systems of the market and of political discourse run entirely on these adaptive narrative mechanics, constantly redefining what's valuable and what's true, what fundamental human value or belief, maybe something like truth or justice or genuine empathy, what is robust enough in its very essence to resist being reframed, copied, combined, or ultimately just neutralized by these endlessly self-generating mechanics of inspiration?